The glass doors of my father's law firm felt heavier than I remembered. I pushed through them anyway, keeping my face completely still, while my stepmother Diane stood in the center of the reception area, holding a manila folder like it was a trophy she'd just won at the A&P show. "I know this is difficult, sweetheart," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of warmth that had always made my skin crawl. "But your father was very clear about his wishes. Everything goes to me. The firm, the house in Remuera, the Bach up in the Bay of Islands. All of it." She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way you study something you've already decided isn't worth much. "I do hope you're not going to make this unpleasant. My name is Sophie Hargreaves." I was 28 years old, standing in the foyer of the firm my father had built from nothing over 30 years, and I had just been told I was getting nothing. Not a single dollar. Not the pearl earrings my mother left behind. Not even the framed photo of our family taken at Piha Beach the summer before she got sick. "I'm not going to make anything unpleasant," I said. "You're welcome to it, Diane." She blinked. Whatever reaction she had been preparing herself for, that wasn't it. My father, Graham Hargreaves, had been one of the most respected property lawyers in Auckland. He'd built Hargreaves and Associates through 20 years of 16-hour days, earning a reputation for honesty that people in the industry still talked about. He died of a stroke 6 weeks ago at 61. Far too young, far too sudden. And within 4 days of the funeral, Diane had already been on the phone to his business partners. She had come into our lives when I was 22, fresh out of my law degree at Victoria University, and buzzing with plans to join Dad's firm eventually. Diane was 43 then, a property consultant who had handled a development deal for the firm. Dad said she made him laugh for the first time in years. I had wanted to believe him. I had tried very hard to believe him, actually, for a long time. But I knew what I knew. 2 nights before Dad died, he had called me on a Tuesday evening, just after 9. I was on my couch in my Ponsonby flat, eating leftover pasta, when my phone lit up with his name. "Soph." His voice had been thin, not quite right. "I need you to come to the office tomorrow morning. Early. Before anyone else gets in. Dad, are you okay? There are things I should have told you sooner." He paused, and I could hear him exhale slowly. "The filing cabinet in my office. Bottom drawer, at the back. The combination for the lock on the inner panel is your mom's birthday. Day, month, year." Another pause. "Don't come in through reception. Use your old swipe card if it still works. And Soph, don't tell Diane." I had sat up straighter on the couch. "Dad, what's going on?" "Just come. First thing. We'll talk properly." His voice had softened then, just slightly. "I miss you, sweetheart. I've missed you for a while, and that's my fault, and I'm sorry about it." Those were the last words he said to me that were entirely his own. He had the stroke early the next morning, before I got there. By the time I reached Auckland City Hospital, Diane was already in the corridor outside his room, looking composed in a way that seemed rehearsed. He never regained consciousness. He died on a Thursday afternoon, with weak autumn sun coming through the window. Diane had handled everything after that with remarkable efficiency. The funeral arrangements were done in under 48 hours. The death notices went out. The firm was informed. Cards arrived and were acknowledged. She moved through the whole process like someone completing a project, and I had stood at the edge of it all, feeling like a visitor in my own grief. I had gone to the office on the Saturday, 2 days after the funeral, when I knew Diane would be at her sister's place in Takapuna. My old swipe card still worked. I still don't know if Dad had kept it active deliberately, or if it was just an oversight nobody had caught. But the little light on the reader turned green, and I slipped inside. His office smelled of him, old books and the particular cedar of his desk, bought at an estate auction in Epsom 20 years ago. The portrait of Mum hung where it always had, beside the window, painted from a photograph taken at their wedding. She was laughing in it, turning back toward the camera with her hair coming loose. And every time I'd sat in that office as a kid, I'd found it comforting, like she was still checking in on things. The filing cabinet was where it had always been. The bottom drawer had a recessed panel at the back that I hadn't known existed until that phone call, and the combination Mum's birthday, the 15th of March, 1963, opened it on the first try. What I found there took me nearly 4 hours to go through properly. I sat on the floor of my father's office, with documents spread across the carpet, and read through everything twice. By the time I locked the panel again, photographed everything on my phone, and let myself out into the cool Auckland morning, I understood why Dad had sounded the way he had on the phone. I understood a great deal of things I hadn't understood before. So when Diane stood in the firm's foyer 6 weeks later, holding what she believed was my father's final will, and told me I was getting nothing, I said that was fine, because I already knew what she didn't know, and I had already made a phone call. She was still watching me with that careful expression as I turned to leave. "Oh, Sophie," she said it lightly, like an afterthought. "I'll need your visitor lanyard back. Obviously, you won't be coming and going as you please anymore." I unclipped the lanyard from my jacket and set it on the reception desk without a word. In the lift on the way down, I let myself breathe. The documents I had found in my father's hidden panel were not what I had expected. I had gone in, bracing myself for something to do with the will. A previous version, maybe, or a note about his intentions. What I found instead was a careful, methodical record assembled by a man who had realized too late that the person he trusted most had been using him as an instrument. Diane had been managing the firm's trust accounts. It had started small, as these things apparently always do. A transfer here routed through an account Dad hadn't recognized at first. An invoice paid to a contractor that, on closer inspection, existed only on paper. She had been doing it for at least 3 years by the time Dad found the first thread and started pulling. The documents in that panel showed he had been pulling very carefully for 7 months before the stroke took him. There were printed bank statements, with transactions circled in red pen, printouts of emails between Diane and a man named Carl Whitfield, who appeared to be a property developer, and something else entirely, depending on which document you were reading. There were records of 3 client trust funds that had been quietly depleted and then quietly replenished, presumably to avoid triggering an audit, and one that hadn't been replenished at all. There was also a letter, addressed to me in Dad's handwriting, folded in folds and paper clipped to the inside of the panel door. I had read it 4 times in the office, and probably another 20 times since. "Sophie," it began, "if you're reading this without having spoken to me first, then I've run out of time to tell you in person, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for a lot of things, actually. And I'll try to get through all of them here. I need you to know that the will she has is not the real one. I signed that document 18 months ago during a period when I was not well, and she was managing more than she should have been allowed to manage. I have been trying to have it corrected through a solicitor she doesn't know about, a woman named Janet Ford at 40 Legal in Newmarket. Janet has the real will, signed and witnessed 3 months ago. You need to call her. The rest of what I found, the accounts, the records, everything in this panel needs to go to someone who can do something with it. There is a contact at the Financial Markets Authority. Her name is Rebecca Taine. I have included her number. Tell her you're my daughter, and that I was in the process of making a formal complaint. She'll understand. I should have listened to you about Diane years ago. You saw something I didn't want to see, and I made you feel foolish for it, and that wasn't right. I was proud, and I was lonely, and I made choices I can't take back. But I can try to make this part right. I love you very much. I'm proud of every single thing about you. Don't let her take that from you, along with everything else. Dad." I had called Janet Forday from the car park outside the firm that Saturday morning. She had been expecting my call. She had the real will ready for me to come and review, and she had a way of speaking careful and warm at the same time that made me feel like I could hold myself together for a bit longer. I called Rebecca Taine at the FMA that afternoon. The weeks between that Saturday and the day I stood in the foyer watching Diane accept my lanyard were not easy ones. I met with Rebecca twice, then 3 times. I handed over copies of everything, and the originals went into secure storage. A forensic accountant was brought in. There were conversations I had to have in rooms with too many people and not enough windows, going over the same transactions from different angles while someone took careful notes. I had also, quietly, been working with Janet Ford to have the fraudulent will formally contested. The process was slow, and it was expensive, and it required me to be professional and contained in a way that sometimes felt like trying to hold a door shut against a wind that very much wanted to come in. All the while, Diane was conducting herself as though she had already won. She announced the transition of leadership to the firm's clients. She redecorated Dad's office. I heard about it from his longtime PA, a woman named Allison, who had been with the firm for 19 years and was quietly furious about everything. Diane had apparently had the portrait of my mother taken down and placed in storage. She also, in what I can only describe as a spectacular lapse of judgment, gave an interview to a business magazine about her vision for Hargreaves and Associates. The piece ran with a photograph of her at Dad's cedar desk. The caption read, "Carrying a legacy forward." I had read that caption in my flat in Ponsonby and thought about Dad writing his letter on the floor of that office, sick and running out of time, trying to leave me the tools I would need. I thought about it for a long time. The FMA moved on. A Wednesday morning in late autumn. I had been told to stay away from the building until I received confirmation, which was genuinely one of the harder instructions I've ever been given in my life. I sat in a cafe on Shortland Street, 2 blocks away, with a flat, white, I wasn't really tasting, watching the time on my phone. Rebecca texted me at 11:27. "We're in. You can come up." I had grown up coming to this building. Dad used to bring me in on school holidays when I was small, and I'd sit at the big table in the meeting room, drawing on legal pads while he worked. The receptionist on the ground floor had known me since I was 9 years old. When I came out of the lift on the 4th floor, I could hear Diane's voice from down the corridor. It was a voice I had heard many times when things weren't going the way she wanted, that particular sharp register that had always preceded a shift in strategy. She was using it now, and it wasn't working. I came around the corner into the main office space and found her standing between 2 FMA investigators, her handbag still over her shoulder as though she had been caught mid-departure. Several members of staff were standing at their desks, unsure what to do with themselves. Allison, Dad's PA, was near the door to his office, and she caught my eye and nodded once, very firmly. Diane saw me, and something moved across her face. Not just anger, but a recalculation, the look of someone rapidly reassessing a situation they had believed was under control. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she said, and I noticed the careful wording. Not "what are they doing, what are you doing?" As though I was the problem here. "I'm doing what Dad asked me to do," I said. I kept my voice steady. "He spent 7 months documenting everything, Diane. He was thorough. You probably knew that about him. Actually, he was always incredibly thorough. Your father was ill." Her tone shifted, became something almost gentle. "His judgment at the end wasn't what it should have been. You know that, Sophie. The medications. The stress. The real will is with Janet Ford at Ford Legal," I said. "It's been there for 3 months. The witnesses are a retired judge and a partner at another firm. It's going to be very difficult to argue diminished capacity on that one." Whatever color remained in her face left it. Rebecca Taine stepped forward with documents that I knew by now included the full scope of what the FMA and an independent forensic accounting firm had verified over the past several weeks. The trust account irregularities, the false invoices, the shell company associated with Carl Whitfield, who had, it turned out, entered into a property development agreement with Diane 4 years ago that had been partially funded with client money. There were other things too. Things from further back, a previous firm in Christchurch where Diane had worked briefly before a sudden resignation that, examined now, looked considerably less like a career change. "Diane Hartley," Rebecca said, "we are executing a warrant for the seizure of financial records associated with Hargreaves and Associates trust accounts. You are also required to accompany us for formal questioning regarding potential breaches of the Financial Markets Conduct Act." "You can't do this," Diane said it quietly, almost to herself. "The documentation is quite thorough," Rebecca said, in a tone that did not leave much room for argument. Diane looked at me one last time before they walked her toward the lift. There was something in her expression I hadn't expected. Not rage, exactly, but something rawer than that. "I made this firm profitable," she said. "I brought in 3 major clients in 2 years. Everything I did was to protect what your father built." I thought about Dad's letter, the careful red pen marks on the bank statements, 7 months of quiet, painstaking work by a man with a failing heart who was more afraid of leaving me unprotected than he was of dying. "You protected yourself," I said. "There's a difference." The lift doors closed. The weeks that followed were a particular kind of exhausting that I hadn't encountered before. Not the exhaustion of grief, which I was already familiar with, but the exhaustion of process. Interviews and affidavits and meetings with Janet about the probate challenge and conversations with the firm's partners about what came next. The clients had to be contacted. The trust fund discrepancies had to be rectified. Most of the affected accounts had been quietly corrected by Diane's financial maneuvering over the years. But one had not. And that client, an older woman who had been using the firm for her family trust for 15 years, I had to be told. That conversation was among the worst of my life. And I had several of them. The real will was admitted to probate without significant contest. Diane's legal team attempted a brief challenge on procedural grounds and withdrew it within a fortnight, which told me everything about how confident they were in their position. Under Dad's actual wishes, the firm passed to me and to a 50-year partnership trust that ensured the existing staff retained their positions for a minimum transition period. The house in Remuera was to be sold, with half the proceeds going to a hospice in Green Lane, where my mother had spent her last weeks. The Bach in the Bay of Islands went to Dad's brother, my Uncle Pete, who cried on the phone when I told him and said Dad had always intended that, and he was glad someone had fixed things. The firm's board met formally 6 weeks after Diane's arrest, with all the information now on the table. James Okafor, a senior partner who had been with Dad since the beginning, looked at me across the table with an expression I recognized as the specific blend of sorrow and resolve that the situation seemed to produce in people who had genuinely loved my father. "Your dad used to say you had the best judgment of anyone he'd trained," James said. "He said it to me more than once, and I don't think he ever said it to you, which was his mistake, and I'm telling you now on his behalf." "Thank you," I said, and meant it in a way that was hard to put words around. "Would you consider staying on? Not just through the transition. Permanently. We need someone at the helm who understands what this firm is actually supposed to be." I looked at the window. Beyond it, Auckland was doing its usual gray and green autumn thing, clouds moving fast over the harbor. I thought about the years I had spent at other firms, doing good work, always at a slight remove from the place I had actually wanted to be. "I'd be honored," I said. The months after that were full in a way I hadn't experienced before. There were audits and restructures and new compliance frameworks to implement, partly required, partly just the right thing to do. We brought in an independent trust account auditor on a quarterly basis. We updated our client communication processes. We also established a small scholarship in Dad's name through the Auckland University Law Faculty, supporting students from low-income backgrounds in the first year of their degree, because it turned out that was something he had been quietly planning to do and hadn't gotten around to, and I wanted to get around to it for him. Diane entered a guilty plea on charges including fraud, misappropriation of client funds, and filing false financial documents. The sentencing took place on a Thursday morning in late winter. 7 years with a minimum non-parole period of 4. Carl Whitfield received a separate sentence of 5 years for his involvement in the property scheme. The FMA issued a statement. The business magazine that had run the profile of Diane quietly removed it from their website. The portrait of my mother was in storage at a climate-controlled facility in Mount Wellington. I had it collected and rehung in Dad's office, my office now, in the position it had always occupied. The restorer I brought in said it was in perfect condition. Mum is still laughing in it, still turning back toward the camera with her hair coming loose. I sat at Dad's cedar desk on the morning after the portrait, went back up and opened his letter one more time. The paper was soft now at the folds, from all the times I had read and refolded it, and I thought that at some point I should have it properly preserved, not put away, just protected. "Don't let her take that from you, along with everything else." She hadn't. I put the letter in the desk drawer and looked at the view my father had looked at for 30 years. The same skyline, the same harbor, the same moving clouds. And I felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for a long time. There is a thing that people who intend to deceive you are counting on, and it is this: that you will be too hurt, too confused, or too afraid to look clearly at what is in front of you. Diane had counted on that. She had counted on grief making me passive, on the shock of the false will making me feel defeated before I had begun. She had looked at me standing in that foyer and seen someone who could be dismissed. But Dad had given me something she hadn't accounted for. Not just the documents in the panel, not just the contact names and the letter. He had given me enough lead time to be steady by the time she showed me what she intended to do. You can move very calmly through a situation when you already know how it ends. I've thought a lot, in the time since, about what I would say to someone who found themselves where I found myself. Someone who has been pushed out of something that was rightfully theirs, by someone who was very good at making that feel inevitable. The first thing I would say is this: calm is not the same as passive. You can absorb a blow without absorbing the story that comes with it. Diane told me, in that foyer, that I was getting nothing, and what she meant was that I was nothing. Those are two very different statements, and only one of them deserves a response. The second thing is, document everything, and document it clearly. My father understood this. He was a lawyer, and he knew the weight of a paper trail. The thing that brought Diane down was not a dramatic confrontation or a clever maneuver. It was 7 months of careful record-keeping by a sick man who refused to leave loose ends. The third thing is about forgiveness, which is more complicated and which I am still working through. I am not angry at Dad for being deceived. I spent a long time being angry about it, and then I realized I was actually just sad, which is different, and grief is the appropriate response to sadness. He was lonely after Mum died. He was a person, not just a father, and people make choices from their loneliness that they wouldn't make otherwise. I understand that now better than I did at 22. What I don't forgive is the deliberate choice to exploit someone's trust. That is a choice, every single time. It is not a mistake or a lapse or a moment of poor judgment. Diane made that choice repeatedly, over years, with clear intention. Understanding it doesn't require excusing it. The last thing I would say is simpler than the rest. The people who underestimate you are handing you an advantage. Let them. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, I went to the hospice in Green Lane, where a small garden had been created with part of the proceeds from the Remuera house sale. There is a plaque on one of the benches there now, with his name on it. I sat on that bench for a long time in the thin spring sunshine, listening to the birds in the pohutukawa trees, and I thought about how he had ended his letter. I love you very much. I'm proud of every single thing about you. I had not always known that. I know it now, and I intend to keep knowing it. There is a quote on the wall of our firm's meeting room now, something I had added during the renovation of the office space. It was Dad's own, something he used to say to junior staff. Your integrity is the only thing in this building that cannot be billed by the hour. Diane thought she was taking everything. She had no idea that the most valuable thing in that office had been sitting in a filing cabinet waiting for me all along.